I'm Rebekah Tweed, Executive Director at All Tech is Human. We are a nonprofit based in New York that brings together a global community of over 42,000 people. Together, we're building the world's largest multi stakeholder, multidisciplinary network in responsible technology. We emphasize leveraging the collective intelligence so that we can most effectively tackle thorny tech and society issues in order to co create a tech future that's aligned with the public interest. Our goal is to diversify tech to include more backgrounds, disciplines, perspectives, and lived experiences so that we're best positioned to meet the challenges that we face as a society. We aim to greatly increase the pace of tech consideration to match the pace of tech innovation. We know tech is not slowing down. We need to move at the speed of tech. We're building and strengthening the responsible tech ecosystem, and we do this through multi stakeholder convening and community building, through multidisciplinary education and resource development, and through extensive career development efforts so that we can establish a robust, responsible tech talent pipeline. So we have a lot of activities for you to get involved in. Please check out alltechishuman.org for details on our mentorship program and working groups, which are led by Sarah Welsh, our university network, which is led by Stephen Keltz, our affiliate program led by our associate director, Sandra Khalil, our talent pool and talent matchmaking service led by Ali Feldhausen. You can check out our job board. You can join our Slack community. You can subscribe to our newsletter. There are so many ways for you to get involved in All Tech is Human. So today's discussion is part of our weekly live stream series. We meet every Thursday at 1 p.m. Eastern, and this is our latest installment of This Month in Responsible AI, where we are keeping tabs on and giving our take on what's been happening in responsible AI over the past month or so. So I am thrilled to be joined today by Renée Cummings. For those who don't know, Renée is an AI ethicist, a criminologist, a futurist, a data science professor of practice at the University of Virginia, a non-resident senior fellow at Brookings Institution, and a senior fellow right here at All Tech is Human. Welcome, Renée.
Welcome, Rebekah, and of course, welcome to everyone out there in virtual land.
Yes, and happy birthday to you yesterday. Hope you had a
Thank you
lovely
so very
day.
much. Thank you. I did. Thank you.
Good. And glad you are spending the day after your birthday right here with us at All Tech is Human. So in this live stream, we are here to update all of you on all things responsible AI. We are going to talk about the Detroit Police Department agreeing to new rules around facial recognition technology. We're going to talk about regulation with the EU AI Act finally going live on August 1st. We will discuss the Supreme Court striking down the Chevron deference and what that could mean for AI guardrails. We're going to talk about AI governance and how this space is evolving right now. We're going to look at the ongoing IP battles between copyright holders and LLM developers. And we also want to talk about sustainability and what it means that AI developers are exploring nuclear power to meet the energy needs of training their models. And we might just touch on what a potential Trump-Vance administration could look like for US AI regulation. So everyone, we will be taking your questions. So if you're watching this live on LinkedIn right now, please drop a question into the comments. Everyone always has great comments, which we appreciate. Please throw in some questions throughout the conversation too. We're going to add those in at the end. And we also want to know where you're tuning in from. So go ahead and let us know that as well. Okay, Renée. So we're going to start with a topic you know very well. We're going to talk about AI, the use of AI in the criminal justice system. Want to talk about surveillance and biometric data. So the Detroit Police Department agreed to new rules regarding the use of facial recognition technology. And this came about as part of a legal settlement after the wrongful arrest of Roger Williams, a Black man who was arrested after being misidentified by facial recognition technology. And the Detroit Police Department has agreed to new guardrails limiting how it can use facial recognition tech. So these policies, they prohibit the police from arresting people based solely on the results of a facial recognition search. Or on the results of a photo lineup that's conducted immediately after a facial recognition search. So this also states that photo lineups can't be conducted solely on the basis of facial recognition. There has to be additional evidence linking a suspect to a crime. And the policies can be enforced by a court for the next 4 years. And this also requires police training around the risks and dangers of facial recognition tech. It also requires an audit of all cases since 2017 where facial recognition was used to obtain an arrest warrant. So Renee, would love to have your take on this development. Do you think this is these are good rules? Do you think this is enough? Do you think this should be applied to other municipalities in the future?
Well, certainly. And Robert Williams, that case in Detroit, where he was misidentified using facial recognition. And of course, it was also a case of wrongful arrest. I think he has received the highest and the first award from the judicial system. I think it's $300,000 for the trauma that he experienced. We also know the Detroit police has had its challenges with facial recognition because we thank the judicial system for justice in the case of Robert Williams, but we know Portia Woodruff, a Black woman as well, arrested while she was about 8 months pregnant because of facial recognition. So Detroit really has a lot of work to do when it comes to policing, when it comes to using AI and algorithms in policing. All of this set against the backdrop of algorithmic justice. And I think we've got to pause here and we've got to thank Dr. Joy Bulamwini and the Algorithmic Justice League, because Joy and the American Civil Liberties Union really held up Robert Williams and his family since 2020 when he was arrested. I know particularly Joy has really sort of held his hand and walked him through the process and the understanding of algorithmic rights and data rights and why we really need to think about the ways in which we are deploying facial recognition technology. So the Detroit police is definitely going to have to do some training and some retraining. They're definitely going to have to bring an ethical approach to the ways in which they are deploying algorithms. Now they understand that they cannot use facial recognition technology in a serendipitous or capricious manner. Now they understand that these are not technologies that can be deployed or used like toys. While facial recognition is indeed a tool, it is not a toy, nor is it an excuse for lazy policing. What the judgment also says is that police officers can use an image as a lead, but they've got to go out in the community and do what they need to do best, which is community policing, which is old school policing, which is really doing a thorough investigation, getting the information that you turn into intelligence, and hopefully turning that intelligence into evidence. So this is a big judgment. It's something that we need to pay attention to, and it's really something that lifts up this whole concept of algorithmic justice and why we really need to think about data. And it's something that I have said, and I continue to say, is that data really does not have the ability oftentimes to forget. And when we're building technologies using historic data, we've got to understand that data does not have the luxury of historical amnesia. We've also got to understand that certain communities have historically experienced data differently. So this is a way for us to think about responsible data science and to think about responsible AI and really think about the potential of an algorithm to harm, to hurt, to traumatize, and really change people's lives sometimes in ways in which they are unable to recoup in real time.
Very well said, Renee. I want to turn right now to maybe the biggest deal in AI regulation, which I think a lot of people are wondering about, and that is the EU AI Act that finally goes live on August 1st. And that's when the clock will start ticking on these deadlines around compliance. So I'm going to outline a little bit about how that's going to unfold for our audience, what we're looking at regarding these timelines. And then Renee, I'll get your take on this development. So okay, so we have a series of deadlines that companies have to comply with. A small number of potential use cases for AI are just banned outright under this law, and that deadline is going to come first. So the AI Act bans these unacceptable risk use cases for AI, and these are use cases that threaten citizens' rights, like social scoring systems, like what you would see in China, like compiling facial recognition databases by the untargeted scraping of faces from the internet or from security camera footage, like CCTV footage. It bans law enforcement's use of real-time remote biometrics in public places. In most cases, there are some exceptions, like abductions. And it bans biometric categorization to deduce characteristics of individuals, things like sexual orientation or religion. Systems that try to read emotions are banned in workplaces and in schools. And the use of predictive policing tools is banned in some instances. So tech companies will have until February 2nd, 2025 to comply with banning these unacceptable risk use cases. That's the first deadline. The next deadline is May 2nd, 2025. And at that time, developers will be provided codes of practice, which the EU's AI office is responsible for providing. And that office is an ecosystem building and oversight body that has been established by this law. So developers will have a set of rules outlining what legal compliance looks like. So what benchmarks they need to hit, what KPIs, specific transparency requirements, and things like that. There is some question around who's going to be coming up with those and whether or not tech companies will have, some influence over that, but that should be happening by May. And then by next August, at the 1-year mark, general purpose AI systems like chatbots must comply with copyright law and fulfill transparency requirements like sharing summaries of the data used to train the systems. The following year, by August of 2026, the rules of the AI Act will apply generally to companies operating in the EU, and August of 2027 is how long developers of some high-risk AI systems will have to comply with rules around things like risk assessment and human oversight. And this risk level includes applications integrated into things like infrastructure and employment, as well as essential services like banking, healthcare, and the justice system. The penalties here, we're looking at fines of about 38 million or 7% of global annual revenue. So those are fairly significant. So Renee, just wanted to turn it over to you now. Does that sound about right? Are there impacts that you're seeing so far, or like how are people receiving this? What are you hearing from different stakeholders you're in contact with? Is this well received? And are there sticking points that are causing friction or challenges with compliance that you're hearing about?
Well, certainly it was quite a mouthful, right, of things that you had to relate. So the challenge is a lot of deadlines between August 2nd extending into 2027. So that's a lot of time, a lot of deadlines. The challenge becomes whether or not companies are able to become compliant. What's the cost of becoming compliant for certain smaller companies, mid-sized companies? How are they going to do it? And if they don't become compliant within those deadlines, can they really sustain those fines? The other challenge is, while there is a phased approach to this regulation, there is really not a phased approach to the ways in which AI and generative AI is being developed and deployed. So while this is moving in its phases and moving nicely and at pace, there is another pace that's happening that may provide an extraordinary amount of rigor on that policy terrain for this legislation. Because we know one of the things about legislation is that it is not real time and it doesn't have the flexibility to change to include the things that are happening at the moment. We don't know what's going to be happening in AI in 2026. We don't know what's going to be happening in AI in 2027. We don't even know what's happening in AI at the end of this year. So there are going to be certain doors that we may be able to enter with this legislation, and there may be certain doors that this legislation will be totally closed off to. The good thing about it, it is comprehensive, it is precedent, and many other countries will be looking at the EU's AI Act to build upon for their own national strategies. Of course, regional and international and global strategies are all, being built on this, AI Act. Again, the challenge would be the kinds of risks that we may not be thinking about that may present themselves within the next 3 years, and then how relevant will these phased, of course, deadlines be, and whether or not companies are able to meet these deadlines in real time, or whether or not companies are going to take an extraordinary hit. The question around this act continues to be whether or not it's going to stymie competitiveness, or whether or not it's going to allow companies and to continue to be competitive. I am a firm believer that innovation and ethics can exist in the same space. Again, this is a brilliant piece of legislation. It is very comprehensive. It is very solid. It does give you some leverage to do the work that needs to be done when it comes to compliance, when it comes to business continuity planning, when it comes to your own risk and crisis strategies as a company. But the challenge is, this world of AI is changing so quickly. We've got to ask ourselves, is it going to still be relevant as AI develops and continues to be deployed as we move from 2024 to 2027, which is the expanse of the deadlines?
Right. And thinking about how, as laws are put into effect, how difficult it is to foresee years down the road. That brings us to our next topic, which is right here in the US, around the US Supreme Court decision that overturned the Chevron deference and what that could mean for AI guardrails and many other guardrails. For a little bit of background here, the US Supreme Court struck down the Chevron deference. That is the doctrine that required courts to defer to federal agencies' interpretations of congressional laws when there are disputes over how to interpret ambiguous language in legislation passed by Congress. And of course, that comes up when Congress is passing laws. They don't necessarily know all of the things that will be coming in the future. And so subject matter experts within agencies are probably best positioned to make informed decisions, more so than a judge or the courts that are assigned to the case. So I'm curious, Renee, what are you thinking about this? What kind of impact do you think this is going to have on AI specifically? Of course, it will impact so many things, but as we're thinking about what that could look like for AI, very curious what you took away from the Chevron decision.
Most definitely. And I think I'm going to use one of the most popular disclaimers, which is I'm not a lawyer and I don't play one on TV. So what I'm giving here is really just my interpretation. And of course, these types of topics really need to be dialogued and ventilated with someone who is, of course, a lawyer, attorney, or someone actually, working in that federal space. What I will say is this: I've read the judgment. I've also read the criticisms of it. I've also read the media reports and, of course, journalistic perspectives as well. And some people think that it's going to be a massive shock to the legal system. There are other people who say it's definitely not a game changer and the fallout is going to be very limited. It's a question of what used to be reasonable interpretation. And now the Supreme Court saying that reasonable interpretation philosophy is now being considered to be fundamentally misguided when we're thinking about it. One of the things I will say from someone who has worked in the criminal justice system for quite some time, judges don't ever like to be put in a position where they believe they are making new law. That's not their jobs. And I think what we're going to see is federal agencies still having the bandwidth to provide that sort of reasonable interpretation that's required, that level of expertise that's required. And I really don't think that this is going to have that kind of massive shock to AI. AI is still a new area of expertise. We know that many of our policymakers, many of our technocrats, still not familiar with the sophistication of the technology and the intricacies of the technology. Even the technical and computer and data science minds that are building this technology still unsure of why the technology does what it does and when it does. So I think it's something we need to look at, but I don't believe that it's really going to have this massive shock or derail AI governance or AI policy development or responsible AI in real time, because AI requires a requisite level of thinking and understanding that is going to need the reasonable interpretation of the experts in the field. So just my take, but I think if we want to get drill deeper into that, it would be lovely for you to convene a group of our tech lawyers to really, let us know what's happening in that zone.
Yeah, and we have plenty. We
I
definitely
know
could
we
do
do it,
that.
but all tech is human.
Yes. Um, and moving from the very high level, legal minds and courts and regulations, I want to talk a little more about governance that happens much closer to the ground. At All Tech as Human, we're seeing a major uptick in things like third-party algorithmic audits, an influx of AI governance roles on the job board, and in also in-house red teaming opportunities and other types of safeguards. We're seeing a lot of public red teaming efforts. We're seeing algorithmic bias bounties, other types of public accountability mechanisms. Like just last week, we hosted a hackathon for the Algorithmic Bias Bounty Challenge that we did in partnership with Dr. Ruman Chowdhury's Humane Intelligence nonprofit. And that was the first in a series of 10 algorithmic bias bounty challenges that Humane Intelligence is organizing as part of their efforts to convene a community of practice engaged in public accountability mechanisms for AI. So that's what we're seeing on our end. I want to know, Renee, what are you seeing in the AI governance space? What do you see companies doing? What do you see users and citizens doing? And are you seeing the role of AI governance increasing in your daily life?
Most definitely. I think I'm seeing a lot of what you're seeing, right? Because we're all in the same space. And what you said there is very important, that development of a community of practice, which is so critical. What I love about the space at the moment is that we're trying so many new things. So we have the algorithmic audits, we have the red teaming, we have different individuals coming together to collaborate and to have these conversations that are required. And then we are seeing an extraordinary amount of advocacy at the level of law and regulations. We're seeing a lot of work in the geopolitical space when we think of the fact that data, of course, is the greatest game changer at the moment. AI, there is no AI without data. I always say data governance is AI governance, and we've got to understand that. I think we're all seeing the same thing, AI governance, data governance, very critical at the moment. If we truly want to harness the extraordinary benefits of this technology, we've got to ensure that it is governed. We've got to ensure that we pay attention to questions around accountability. We know transparency, explainability, auditability, all very critical. We also know that stewardship and policy development and governance and equity, these are critical questions as well, as with the case of Robert Williams and his recent award for facial recognition. We're understanding that algorithmic justice is very important. We are seeing in the housing sector how important justice is as well. We're seeing it in just about every sector. The health sector, when we're thinking about deploying algorithms, we're seeing where equity and justice are critical to healthcare. So I think there is a movement, there is a groundswell at the moment when it comes to governance, but we cannot get lazy. We cannot believe communities of practice are all that we need. We've got to move from practice to action. And we've got to ensure that at the global level, we are paying attention. We've got to ensure at the national level, we are paying attention. And we've got to really amp up the efforts when it comes to governance and when it comes to including all countries into that governance conversation. We know the G7 have been leading the way. We know most recently our religious leaders are met, I think it's in Hiroshima, and they signed this declaration about AI and questions around AI ethics and world peace. I think the Pope also made a statement where he spoke about human oversight and human control and human dignity as critical to the development of AI and new and emerging technology. So conversations are happening, but I think we've got to pay attention and ensure that our policy policy developers and our leaders really deliver on that promise for us to really, truly enjoy this technology and ensure that this technology does the extraordinary things that it is really capable of doing. We've got to ensure that we pay attention to those questions of diversity and equity and inclusion and justice. And we've got to ensure that fairness is always high on the agenda when we're talking about AI and talking about data.
Absolutely. And as we're talking about public accountability mechanisms, one thing we keep seeing is generative AI users uncovering issues and calling out companies on social media or in their own public spaces. We've been seeing some IP battles played out on social media. There was Figma. They had to disable their AI design feature, Make Design, because it appeared to be ripping off the designs of Apple's weather app. And so someone basically was playing around with it, discovered this issue, and then went on X or Twitter to basically call out Figma for that. And Figma did, they clarified. They said, they denied that it was doing that, but they did say that that Make Design uses off-the-shelf LLMs and combines that with some systems that they commissioned, and that the problem with that approach was that the variability was too low, and so they temporarily disabled the Make Design feature until they could be confident with that. We also saw Perplexity, some news outlets like Forbes and Wired accused Perplexity AI of plagiarism and unethical web scraping. And Perplexity combines a search engine with a large language model that generates answers with pretty detailed responses, not just links. They don't train their own foundation models. They use open or commercially available ones, and then they take the information that gathers from the internet and translate that into answers. So Perplexity maintains it has a right to use web content for summarizations, and because of the nuances of fair use, which are still being litigated and worked out in the courts, this is apparently like legal and fine. So plagiarism isn't illegal, so these summaries are going to continue. Then there was also a report by Proof News. It was co-published in Wired in the last day or two, and that one was where basically Proof News found that some of the wealthiest AI companies in the world have used material from YouTube videos to train AI, despite YouTube's rules against harvesting their materials without permission. And there was an investigation that Proof News had done that they found the subtitles from 170,000 or so YouTube videos were siphoned from different YouTube channels and were used by large companies. And the data set that they were pulled from was called YouTube subtitles. And so that contains all these transcripts. And those transcripts, some of those were used in a huge data set for training a lot of different large language models. So just curious, Renee, what your take is on all of these types of issues around intellectual property and copyright, and how these things do continue to pop up. And in some of these cases, it's basically users who are finding these issues and then basically calling out the companies in various ways publicly. And then the companies have to come back and either deny or fix it or whatever. And I'm just really curious what your take is on this and all of these kind of ongoing IP battles between copyright holders and LLM developers in various ways.
And so what it really speaks to is the fact that many of these companies are not doing really robust and rigorous red teaming before they deploy these applications and these models. What it also does for us, the wider public, is that we are able to see the flaws. We are able to see whether or not the approaches were lazy. We're able to see where the corners were cut, what are the kinds of shortcuts they took, where they were scraping the data from, the things that they were doing. So it's really important for us to see these kinds of cases. I know the companies are saying, well, their models are hallucinating, and that's all good and well. But if you're hallucinating, you can't go through life hallucinating. It means you need some sort of therapeutic intervention, because we want to ensure that you have a healthy and wholesome and holistic life experience. So I think what this says is that the developers and content creators and creatives and intellectual property and copyright lawyers really need to have that community of practice when these large language models are being trained and when they are being deployed, because we continue to see the same kinds of risks. We continue to see companies making the same kinds of mistakes. And we continue to see these models being deployed on, the general public. And many of them are compromised. Many of them have challenges. Many of these companies are creating crises for themselves. So I think what they may need to do is that they may need to really, when they're, training these models, ask themselves, who's in the room? Really ask themselves who's in the room, because they continue to make some very, very basic mistakes, but basic mistakes that do have long-term impacts because of the scale of the technology. So we will continue to see these kinds of challenges with large language models. We will continue to see these kinds of challenges with AI and emerging technologies, because these are questions around prompt engineering. These are questions around due diligence. Are they truly doing their due diligence? These are questions around duty of care and duty to warn. And you've got to ask yourself, what is your risk management strategy? What is your crisis management strategy when you're building these models, when you are training these models? So this is something that we continue to see in the space of course, generative AI and AI. And I think it's great journalistic work always. We've got to really commend and always celebrate our journalists who are bringing these things to the fore. And of course, companies just really need to understand that you cannot cut corners. You cannot be lazy. You cannot say, well, it's a third party scraping mechanism that's scraping and sending it your way. You've got to be responsible. You've got to be accountable. And if you are going to be accountable, it means that you've got to be eternally vigilant about the ethical frameworks that are required, that include more diversity in perspectives and in design thinking when you are really training these models, because the mistakes continue to be really, really elementary. And we would hope for better from many of these companies, given the billion-dollar investments that they're out there pulling in. Put some of those billions into your ethics. Let's do that.
So many good points. And I'm thinking about, you mentioned the role of journalists in helping to hold companies to account. We've talked about the role of civil law and lawsuits to right the early wrongs before regulations are in place to have more robust standards for companies. And then we talked about the role of the public in calling out companies or really doing their own what amounts to doing the red teaming for the companies, but in a way that is much less advantageous for their PR and reputation. So they're coming back to journalists. There was one other question I had around a story that I saw recently that I wanted to ask you about, and then I do want to turn to some audience questions. So saw like very early in the month, um, in the Wall Street Journal, there was an article about how some of the largest tech companies are making deals to buy nuclear power directly from plants. Um, and then a later article in a different publication I saw about potentially reopening 3 Mile Island for this end. And it sounds like between both of those two articles, the owners of about a third of U.S. nuclear power plants are in talks with tech companies to provide electricity to new data centers. Because of the demands of artificial intelligence. And for instance, AWS is expected to close a deal with Constellation Energy, and that's going to directly supply them with electricity from their nuclear power plants. But because new power plants can take such a long time to build, a decade or so, they are considering reopening dormant plants like 3 Mile Island, although there are some regulatory hurdles, I guess, and they're just talking about reopening one of the two units at that plant, apparently the one that did not melt down, so that's good. But yeah, I want to talk about what this means for sustainability, what could be the impact of AI developers, shifting to nuclear power, and what kind of impact that has on just the overall energy needs and sustainability goals of our societies.
So we know that data centers are energy guzzlers. That we know. And we also know that data centers are popping up, like dandelions, right? All over the place. And we know that Northern Virginia seems to be the go-to place where many of these data centers are being built. This is the challenge. One of the things that I always say is that, AI is giving us the ability to really solve some of the global challenges that we've not been able to really put our hand on. But AI is also creating many new ethical challenges. The question of sustainability and, of course, resilience being a critical challenge. So we know that there's this conversation around nuclear power, and nuclear power not only is it being clean, it's reliable, and it's supposed to be, of course, sustainable. But we also know that many of the big tech companies already have invested extraordinary money into many of these nuclear power plants as well. We know the three big names have been bandied about. We know all the big investment sort of blogs and websites and journals are talking about this. We know that compute power is geopolitical power. We know that data power is the power that all the big nations want. We also know that the kind of energy that's required to train a model, the kind of energy that's required to give AI its firepower, it's extraordinary. It's extraordinary. Just in Virginia alone, there are conversations that within the next 5 years, the electricity costs in Virginia is definitely probably going to go up. We know that some of the big electricity companies are already in conversations with big tech and these data centers. So these are critical questions around accountability, around sustainability, around whether or not this technology is creating more risks than reward. This is a question around the depletion of resources and whether or not we will have the kinds of resources that are required to sustain this kind of compute power. Of course, it's questions around climate justice that are so very critical to these conversations, questions around environmental justice and these communities where these data centers are being built. So there are so many questions, as they say, more questions than answers. So this is why responsible AI is so critical at the moment. This is why these conversations need to be ventilated with our policymakers, our legislators, our community leaders and community activists who really need to understand what is happening. We know that many individuals believe nuclear energy is a faster route to green energy. There are conversations around that. but there's just, so much that needs to be discussed, because if we want to build a sustainable and resilient future, we cannot deplete all our resources. And we do know, as I said, compute power is now geopolitical power. But what is geopolitical power without a sustainable environment and a planet for us to exist in, or to coexist? So, what is all this power if where we live no longer becomes a space where we can thrive in a healthy and resilient way?
Renee, we have one question from the audience I'm going to pull up. This is from Logan. It's very specific. We'll see what we can offer Logan here regarding outright bans in the EU AI Act. Are penalties limited to fines? For example, with a 7% revenue fine, will out of regulation applications be able to recoup 93% of their revenue?
Well, thank you so much for that question, Logan. And I think what we're seeing is that there are fines. There are fines. And I think Logan has also highlighted what those fines are going to look like. Let me see if I made any specific notes about the fines. So non-compliance up to about 35 million euros, or 7% of global annual revenue. I think that's the framework, or that's the bandwidth that they're working with. And the fines come back to the fact whether or not small and medium-sized enterprises can really sustain those kinds of fines and be competitive at the same time if they're unable to be compliant within the deadline. So I think there's going to be a lot more negotiation between the bodies that are responsible for, of course, ensuring that companies come into compliance, and of course the bodies that are going to be looking at the enforcement and the fines. But these are questions that we're going to see as cases come up, and as companies maybe don't come up to scratch, with what they need to do to get themselves into compliance within the deadline.
We have many incredible comments at the LinkedIn event. So thank you to everyone for chiming in and giving your thoughts on this. Renee, let's close by talking about what's top of mind for you right now. So what are you seeing and hearing? What's the biggest issue as you are traveling and speaking all over the world and making the rounds? What are your fellow panelists and peers talking about? What are clients or students talking about? So yeah, I would love to hear what's on your mind right now, Renee.
So I will say this, what's actually on my mind at the moment would be the ethics and safety guidelines that are required for agentic AI and agentic AI systems. And I have to really credit a very good friend of mine, one of the most brilliant women in the world of AI and AI ethics, Nell Watson. And Nell has a new book out that's called, I think it's Taming the Machine. And I think everyone needs to read that because she's a brilliant futurist. And Nell at the moment has really curated an exceptional team of scholars that are looking at the kinds of safety and ethical guidelines that are required for agentic AI systems. And if you've been paying attention to many of the big tech bosses, they've been sort of categorizing these levels of AI. And these agentic AI systems are definitely where the world is going. The other thing that I want to plug would be Dr. Nicole Turner-Lee. And Nicole is at Brookings, and she has a book that's out called The Digitally Invisible. And many times when we're having these conversations about AI and about digital technology and about new and emerging technology, we keep forgetting there's a huge percentage of people, not only in the US, but globally, who are digitally invisible, who do not have access to digital technology, who are not in the conversation about AI and generative AI. So those are two books that I will plug, and I will say to everyone, get a copy. Two brilliant women. I mean, Nell's book is like mind-blowing because she really drills it home. And for me, I've been totally fascinated with these agentic systems, and agentic systems actually communicating and working with other agentic systems. So it's like my AI system coordinating with your system, and say it makes a mistake, and the mistake that could be really detrimental, not only to us, to communities and society. I think everyone's talking about governance. I think everyone is talking about governance on the geopolitical level. I think people are still speaking about risks. We continue to see the kinds of biases and, of course, the kinds of discriminatory deployment of many of the technologies. I think we're also talking about redress, which is what we have seen in the case of Robert Williams coming out of Detroit. And we know that redress is a critical aspect of AI governance and responsible AI. People must be able to be compensated if they've been hurt by an AI system. I think students are always talking about jobs and where they're going to be employed. And I think students are also talking about doing good AI and doing good data science and really having an impact. And I think students are also talking about the future and what that future is going to be. And I think when we think about college students, they're also thinking about, what is that future going to be and how well placed and well positioned they are going to be in that future as well. So lots of conversations, more and more, speaking engagements and conferences that are happening, and just people doing extraordinary work. I think at the moment, the conversation is around journalism and covering AI across all beats, and why it is that AI ethics is critical to every beat. We have elections coming up, so more and more conversations around media manipulation and disinformation, and of course, deep fakes, something that I read that I like, Germany criminalizing deep fakes. I like that in real time. And of course, I shared with you what happened in Hiroshima with religious leaders really committed to the question of AI and, of course, spirituality, which is so critical to the work that we're doing, because we never want to lose that spiritual center. And I always say this, one of the things we don't ever want is for an algorithm to teach us what it means to be human again.
Yep. So many incredible things going on right now in responsible AI. You touched on many incredible things that I think every time we get together, I'm just so inspired by the things that you have to offer, Renee. So thank you so much. 30 seconds here. As we're closing out, what might a potential Trump-Vance administration look like for US AI regulation?
Well, I think that's the million, if not billion-dollar question. But we do know NATO had its 75th anniversary celebration. We know that world leaders have been thinking a lot about AI. We know that AI is the greatest geopolitical game changer. We also know that AI is not only about national security, it's about economic security, it's about prosperity, but it's also about diversity and equity and inclusion and justice. So I think we all will be waiting with bated breath to see, how this election plays out. And what we do know is that we cannot get lazy. What we do know is that we cannot rest on our laurels, so to say, or so to speak. What we do know is that we've got to amp it up when it comes to advocacy, when it comes to understanding algorithmic justice, when it comes to thinking about policy, thinking about regulation, thinking about governance. And we need to really ensure that we are connecting globally. So as we build these communities of practice, we cannot be insular. We have got to expand our cosmology. And we've got to ensure that it's no longer global north and global south, but it's a global world. And we've got to connect, because you know what? We have the technology to do it.
Thank you so much, Renee, as always, for your brilliant insights. We appreciate you so much. And I want to make sure everyone can keep up with you on LinkedIn. And you can also keep up with me on LinkedIn. You can check out everything that All Tech is Human is doing at alltechishuman.org. So thank you to everyone for joining us today. Thank you to Renee for this wonderful conversation, as always. So everyone, have a great rest of your day. Thanks.
Take care. Thanks always. Bye-bye.